We're going to talk about a profile on Ulysses S. Grant. Some of you heard this yesterday. If you were on the website, you got it, but we'll just make sure I was kind of hurrying yesterday, so I want to make sure we get it all. We said that Ulysses S. Grant was actually born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27th of 1822. He was born in Point Pleasant, Ohio. Hiram Ulysses Grant was the oldest of 6 children. He had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. A year after Hiram was born, the Grant family moved from Point Pleasant, Ohio to Georgetown, Ohio, where his father purchased a tannery and some farmland. And a tannery, again, is a place that turns animal hides into leather. As a boy, Hiram became an excellent horseman, and because of his responsibility and maturity as a young boy, he was often sent on business trips for his father. He attended elementary and high school in Georgetown. He graduated from high school in 1839. His father had learned that one of his neighbor's sons had been dismissed from the United States Military Academy at West Point, and Hiram's father asked that local congressman that lived there if he would appoint Hiram Ulysses Grant as a replacement for the young man that was dismissed. The congressman agreed to do it, but when he submitted the paperwork, he made a clerical error and put Ulysses S. Grant on the application. And because Grant was afraid that he would be rejected by West Point because the names weren't the same, he legally changed his name to Ulysses S. Grant on the spot. And that's how that piece of history occurred. Ulysses was accepted to West Point. During his studies there, he was pretty much an average student. He graduated 21st out of 39 in his class, so he wasn't a great academic genius. He did receive demerits at West Point for untidy dress and tardiness. And the thing we pointed out yesterday is when you think about the surrendered Appomattox and he shows up in a private shirt and muddy boots, he never was a real classy dresser, I would just tell you that. Despite his faults at West Point, he did very well in mathematics, geology, and horsemanship. He graduated from West Point in 1843, again ranking 21st out of 39, and he was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant when he left West Point. He was assigned to the U.S. 4th Infantry Regiment after his departure from West Point, which was stationed near St. Louis, Missouri. And during his time in St. Louis, he met his future wife, Julia Dent. The couple fell in love. Grant proposed marriage to her in 1844, but would not be able to marry her right away because he was shipped off for duty during the Mexican War, serving as a quartermaster, someone that oversaw the movement of supplies. Grant served under both General Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott in the Mexican War, and he closely observed their military tactics and leadership skills, which would later make him successful as a general in the Civil War. After their 4-year engagement, Ulysses and Julia were finally married in 1848, and over the next 6 years, the couple had 4 children. Grant was then assigned to several different posts, first to Fort Vancouver in the Oregon Territory. His wife and infant son were not allowed to come with him. She was also pregnant with another child, and when he left, that child was born during the time he was at Fort Vancouver, and he never did see the child during the birth or for a long time afterwards. Well, finally, in the summer of 1853, he was promoted to rank of captain, and he was transferred to Fort Humboldt, which was on the coast of Northern California. During this time at Fort Vancouver and even into Fort Humboldt, he became lonely, he became depressed, which resulted in some heavy drinking on his part. And finally, on July 31st of 1854, after having several run-ins with his commanding officer at Fort Humboldt, he resigned from the military and returned to St. Louis. The point we made there is, as successful as he was as a Civil War general, he had a tough time from the time he resigned from the military the first time, and the second time when he joined when Lincoln asked for those 75,000 volunteers in 1861. He first worked a small farm that was given to him by his father-in-law, but this venture proved to be unsuccessful after a few years. He then failed to find success with a real estate venture. He was denied employment in a couple of different jobs. And finally, it got so bad to support his family, he was reduced to actually selling firewood on a St. Louis street to make enough money to keep things going. Finally, in 1860, he really had to humble himself and bite the bullet, and he went back to his father and asked if he could work in his father's tannery business, which was a little bit embarrassing for him, but what was more embarrassing is now his two younger brothers were his bosses. So it just really was a really pretty tough time for him, and he didn't enjoy it at all. So as I mentioned, when the Civil War started in 1861, and President Lincoln asked for 75,000 volunteers, Grant eagerly joined the Union Army, and the rest is history. After Grant's Civil War years, which won him much fame, we talked about this yesterday, he was elected President of the United States in 1868, despite the fact that he had absolutely no political experience. He was re-elected President in the election of 1872. He actually won that election. I didn't tell you this yesterday, but I'll tell you now because I was rushing. He won that election 286 electoral votes to 66. The point being, it was another big victory for him, despite the fact that he had no political experience. So he wins re-election in 1872. He sweeps that election, collecting 286 electoral votes to his opponent's 66. We also mentioned in hurry yesterday that he was willing to serve a third term, but he actually lost the Republican Party nomination, so he left office. So he wanted to run for 3 terms, but because of things that happened during his first 2 administrations, he was not able to gain the third nomination. He left office knowing he was dying of cancer, knowing that he needed to leave something to his family, in which he did not have much at all. He decided to write his memoirs, and he spent a lot of time writing those memoirs as he was dying of cancer. And finally, who published those, Ryland?
My boy Mark Twain.
Your boy Mark Twain published him. Here's a first edition, first printing of the personal memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant, right here. And he sold those for $500,000, and I looked that up yesterday, and that would be 1.6 million in today's dollars. So if you kind of, I'll just kind of pass, be really careful, but I'll pass one on each side. There's 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2, but those are the original copies of his memoirs. Again, if they sold for $500,000, that's like $1.7 million in today's figures, so that was a lot of money, and it did take care of his family. Well, after publishing his memoirs, he moved to New York, where he suddenly died on July 23rd, 1885. He moved to New York, where he suddenly died on July 23rd of 1885. Kind of interesting, Grant is buried in New York City. And when his wife Julia passed away in 1902, she was also buried at his side. So he is buried in New York City, and his wife Julia passed away in 1902. She is also buried at his side. Now, although he was a very, very popular president, historians debate that he might have been the worst United States president that ever served this country. During his administration, there were many, many scandals. He was a very poor leader. He inherited another conflict that we'll be talking about next. Anybody know what that conflict was? Who was the United States in conflict with like in 1876 and before? Actually, it started like 1850, but went through 1876 and resulted in a battle. Native Americans. Ends up resulting in the Battle of the Little Bighorn. He was in the middle of the Indian Wars, and he used generals such as William Sherman and Philip Sheridan. They were his right-hand men in these Indian Wars, and we're going to get into that. Will be our next topic, will be Native Americans in the United States. And they had a lot of issues during that time. It was a kind of a tough time in history, and his administration was filled with corruption. His cabinet was considered one of the worst cabinets in American history. He took a little bit of the Andrew Jackson philosophy on a cabinet, which meant what? Come on now. What's that?
Supporters, they have no power.
Yeah, supporters of him rather than people that really kind of knew what they were doing. He used the spoils system. Okay? All right, well, there's the lecture. So let's go ahead and talk about what's going to be on the test. The test is going to consist of multiple choice questions, 5 multiple choice questions, 5 short answer questions, and 5 matching questions. So there'll be 15 questions, They'll be worth 5 points apiece. So how much is the test going to be worth? 75, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so it's a little bit smaller, but we're going to get through it. So, answer me this question, Charles. Did Andrew Johnson agree with President Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction? Yes, he did. Answer me this question, Elise. Did Andrew Johnson intend to put Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction into place?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Porter, did Andrew Johnson have the support of the radical Republicans in his plan?
No.
No. Okay, there you go. Figure that one out for yourself. Ryan, did Andrew Johnson serve in both the House and the Senate during his political career? Yes, he did. Rylan, was he loyal to the South as a citizen of Tennessee? No.
Well,
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a supporter, he was a loyalist, and he also spoke against Tennessee's secession from the Union in 1861. Was he an educated man, Josh? Did he receive any formal schooling? Peyton? No? Okay. As far as the Civil Rights Act of 1866, Alexa, did it grant citizenship and equality to all blacks living in the United States? Did the Civil Rights Act of 1866 grant citizenship and equality to all blacks? Yes, it did. Sully, did the Civil Rights Act of 1866, was that a law that President Johnson supported or opposed? Opposed. Did not like black people. Okay, how did he view it constitutionally, Mackenzie? He said it was unconstitutional. That's correct. Okay? Let's talk about the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, Andy. Did it state that all people of the United States were citizens of the nation and were allowed to vote?
Yes.
Women, slap him in the face. No. Andy, did it state that all male citizens were allowed to vote? Yes, it did. Andy, did it cause bitter feelings between any particular groups?
Women.
And? Bitter feelings between women and black men. There we go. Okay. Okay, McKenna. When the radical Republicans set their sights on removing President Johnson from office, did they accuse him of being a drunkard in office? Yes, they did. Emily, did they accuse him of having a harem of loose women in the White House?
Yes.
Yes, they did. Josh, did they pass the Tenure of Office Act hoping to set him up for impeachment? Yes, they did. All right, Rylan. Who was the man who President Johnson despised and wanted to remove from his cabinet, which would be a direct violation of the Tenure of Office Act? That's right, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton.
Edmund.
Edwin.
You want
Yes.
his title too?
Okay,
Yep.
Riley.
Not John either.
You need to calm down.
Yeah, okay, that's right. Elise.
Fine.
Elise, my dear, what was required of the President of the United States according to the Tenure of Office Act?
Getting permission from the.
You had to get,
What?
you had to get what?
Like permission.
There you go.
From the federal, I don't know.
From who?
The Senate.
To do what?
To be able to impeach, or like not impeach, but like remove it from the cabinet.
Very good, that's a great, a perfect answer. He had to get permission from the Senate to remove anyone from his cabinet. Very good. Peyton, who was the senator from Kansas who committed suicide just before the impeachment trial of President Johnson? From Kansas, senator from Kansas who committed suicide.
Somewhere.
You'll be pretty lame if you don't get this.
Jim Lane.
Oh, Jim Lane, okay, Jim Lane. All right, Rachel. Who was the senator, excuse me, who was the man from Kansas who replaced Senator Lane after his suicide hit and succession? Edmund G. Ross, very good. Okay, Mackenzie, how much then, and in today's monies, did President Grant sell his memoirs for prior to his death? 1.6 million? We'll go with that. It's 1.6, it's 1,674,000, so let's go 1.6 million, okay? All right, million today. All right, here we go, and this needs to be underlined and in quotation marks, McKenna. What was the name of the Pulitzer Prize winning book by Senator John F. Kennedy that included the courageous act of Senator Edmund G. Ross of Kansas? Profiles in Courage, not profiles of courage or profiles have to do with courage. Profiles in Courage, underlined and in quotations. Okay, Andrew, my man, who is the wife of President Ulysses S. Grant? Julia Dent, very good. Charles, who was the Democratic Party nominee for president in the election of 1868? Horatio Seymour, very good. Ryland, who was the Democratic vice presidential candidate in the election of 1868? And a house named after him. Francis P. Blair Jr. Okay, Josh, who was the woman who led the protest against the passage of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution? Woman who led the protest against the passage of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, that's right. And Emily, who was the Republican vice presidential candidate with all kinds of political experience in the election of 1868? Schuyler Colfax. There you go, kiddos. 5 multiple choice, 5 short answer, 5 matching. Y'all got a highlighter? We'll work on this in class today. I'll even let you work on it together. You want to get yourself in little groups.
So are you going to post that review on?
No.